I remember the smell of that morning. Cold oatmeal and powdered milk mixed with water that tasted like rust from old pipes. The same smell that had greeted me every single morning for 10 years at Greenfield Children's Home. The same fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects. The same walls painted the color of old bandages, peeling at the corners where moisture had crept in year after year, and nobody had bothered to fix it because nobody bothered to fix anything in a place built for children who were not supposed to stay. But that Tuesday in March was different. It was the last time I would ever sit in that cafeteria. The last time I would hear the scrape of metal chairs against linoleum. The last time I would watch the morning light struggle through windows so grimy they turned the sun the color of weak tea. I was 18 years old, legally an adult, legally free, legally nobody's problem anymore. My name is Ethan Cole, and this is the story of how a rusted iron key changed everything I believed about my family, about love, and about what it truly means to belong somewhere. The morning light filtered through the window of the room I had shared with 7 other boys for the past 3 years. My bed was already stripped down to the bare mattress. The sheets were folded in a neat pile at the foot. My belongings sat in a cardboard box on the floor. 3 changes of clothes, all of them secondhand. A worn paperback copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that I had read so many times the spine was held together with tape and hope. And a photograph. The photograph was of a woman I barely remembered. White hair pulled back in a bun, eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. Hands that I could almost feel on my shoulders if I closed my eyes and concentrated hard enough, reaching back through the fog of years to find a memory that might have been real or might have been something I invented to fill the emptiness. My grandmother, Eleanor Cole, the woman who had left me and my brother at a Greyhound bus station when I was 8 years old with nothing but a note pinned to my jacket. The note had said 6 words, "Please take care of them." I cannot. 6 words. 10 years. That was the math of my childhood. 6 words that had shaped everything I believed about myself. That I was unwanted. That I was a burden too heavy to carry. That somewhere along the way I had done something so wrong, been something so broken, that even my own grandmother could not bear to keep me. The system had told me the story many times. My mother had died when I was 4. A car accident on a rainy night, the kind that makes the evening news for 30 seconds and then disappears forgotten by everyone except the people who lost everything. My father had vanished before I was born. Nothing but a name on a birth certificate that meant nothing to anyone. My grandmother had tried to raise us, but she was old and poor and overwhelmed. One day she simply gave up. She drove us to the bus station, pinned that note to my jacket, and walked away. That was the story. That was my origin. That was the wound I carried in the center of my chest like a stone that grew heavier with every passing year. But I am getting ahead of myself. That morning, the morning of my 18th birthday, I sat on my stripped bed and stared at the cardboard box. Everything I owned in the world fit inside with room to spare. 18 years of life, and this was what it amounted to. A few clothes, a book, a photograph of a woman who had thrown me away. The door opened and my brother Marcus walked in. He was 17 years old, but he looked younger. Thin and pale with dark circles under his eyes that never seemed to go away, and a permanent furrow between his brows that made him look like he was always bracing for a blow. We had the same dark hair, the same gray eyes, the same sharp cheekbones that came from whatever combination of genetics had produced us. But where I had learned to hide my pain behind a mask of calm, Marcus wore his on the surface. His anger was a living thing, always coiled and ready to strike. He had 6 weeks left until his own 18th birthday. 6 weeks until he, too, would be handed an envelope with a few $100s and pushed out into a world that did not want him. "They are calling you," he said. His voice was flat. "Langley's office." I nodded and stood up. I did not ask why. I already knew. It was checkout time, the final formality. The last stamp on the paperwork that would officially end my existence as a ward of the state. "I will come find you after," I said. Marcus did not respond. He just stood there in the doorway watching me, with those guarded eyes that had learned long ago not to hope for anything. We did not hug. We did not shake hands. The system did not teach you to reach for people. The system taught you that reaching only meant something to hold on to could be pulled away. Mrs. Langley's office was at the end of a long hallway that always smelled faintly of bleach in institutional despair. She was a thin woman with gray hair cut short and practical, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She had been running Greenfield for 22 years. She had seen hundreds of children pass through these doors, arrive broken, and leave no less so. I was just another file in her cabinet, another line item in her budget, another problem about to become someone else's problem. Ethan, she said, as I sat down across from her desk. She slid an envelope across the scratched wooden surface. This is your emancipation stipend, $300. It should help you get started. $300. 18 years of life, and this was what the state had decided I was worth. $300 and a cardboard box and a future that stretched out in front of me like an empty road leading nowhere. Thank you, I said, because that was what you said, because there was nothing else to say. The world is what you make of it, she continued. Her voice was flat and rehearsed. She had given this speech before many times. You are a capable young man. I am confident you will find your way. I nodded. I did not believe her. I did not think she believed herself either. We were both just going through the motions, playing our parts in a script that had been written long before either of us arrived. That was when the door opened. The man who stepped into Mrs. Langley's office was not what I expected. He was old, perhaps 70, with white hair combed neatly to one side and a suit that had clearly seen better decades. The fabric was worn at the elbows, slightly shiny from years of use. The collar was frayed at the edges. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than I was, scuffed and softened by time, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned that rushing led to mistakes. But his eyes were sharp and clear and very much alive. Ethan Cole, he asked. His voice was calm, steady. It was the first time I had heard my full name spoken by a stranger in years. At Greenfield, you were just a first name. Just Ethan, report to the dining hall. Just Ethan, lights out in 10 minutes. Your last name did not matter because you did not matter. You were temporary, forgettable, replaceable. But this man said my full name like it meant something, like I meant something. And you are, Mrs. Langley asked. Her expression shifted to something between annoyance and curiosity. Harold Prescott, the man said, offering a slight nod. I am an attorney. I represent the estate of Eleanor Cole. The room went silent. The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Eleanor Cole, my grandmother, the woman in the photograph, the woman who had abandoned us, the woman I had spent 10 years trying to forget and failing every single day. Eleanor Cole passed away 2 years ago, Mrs. Langley said. Her voice was careful. The state was notified at the time. There was no estate of any value. The matter was closed. That is what the state concluded, Harold Prescott replied. But the state, as it often does, concluded incorrectly. He spoke with the patience of a man who had been waiting a long time to say these words. The state saw an old woman with an old house and a pile of debts and determined there was nothing worth pursuing. But I was Eleanor's attorney for 30 years. I knew her better than any state bureaucrat ever could, and I know that what she left behind is worth more than any of them could imagine. He turned his attention to me, and I saw something in his eyes that I could not quite identify. Something that looked almost like recognition, like he was seeing someone he had been waiting a long time to meet. Mr. Cole, he said, may I have a moment of your time? There are matters regarding your grandmother's estate that could not be addressed while you were a minor. Now that you have reached the age of majority, we can finally discuss them properly. Mrs. Langley started to object, but Harold Prescott silenced her with a gentle raise of his hand. Mr. Cole is no longer a ward of this facility, he said. His voice was polite but firm. His business is entirely his own. I am simply here to inform him of his legal rights and options. Surely you cannot object to that. It was a dismissal, polite but unmistakable. Mrs. Langley's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. She had washed her hands of me the moment the clock struck midnight on my 18th birthday. Whatever happened now was not her concern. I followed Harold Prescott out of the building, my cardboard box tucked under one arm. The March air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of a late winter storm gathering on the horizon. The sky was the color of old concrete, heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on everything below. We sat on a concrete bench outside the main entrance. The sounds of the city hummed around us. Cars passing on the street, a siren in the distance. The constant low roar of a world that kept moving, whether you were ready for it or not. Harold Prescott opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. The paper was old and soft at the edges, yellowed with time. He handled it with the care of someone holding something precious. Your grandmother left you something, he said. A property. 47 acres of land in Alder Creek, Nebraska. A farmhouse, a barn, several outbuildings. All of it now belongs to you and your brother. My brother, I repeated. The word felt strange on my tongue. Marcus was still inside that building. Still trapped in the system that had swallowed us both. Still counting down the days until his own release. Yes, Harold said, the inheritance belongs to both of you equally. That was very clear in Eleanor's will. She wanted you to have it together. He pulled documents from the envelope and spread them across the bench between us. A deed, a survey map with a hand-drawn circle around a plot of land, a formal letter on legal stationery, and photographs. Old photographs of a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch of fields stretching to the horizon of a massive oak tree, standing alone against a wide Nebraska sky. There is a complication, he continued. Your grandmother owed back taxes on the property. The amount has accumulated over the 2 years since her death. $11,500. The county has been waiting for someone to claim the estate and settle the debt. If no one does, the property will eventually be seized and auctioned. $11,500. It might as well have been $11 million. I had $300 in my pocket and no prospects, no job, no plan beyond surviving to tomorrow. A development company called Ridgewater Development has made an offer to purchase the land, Harold continued, $17,000. After the taxes are paid, you and your brother would walk away with $5,500 to split between you, $5,500. Split 2 ways, that was $2,750 each. It was more money than I had ever held in my life. It was enough for a bus ticket to anywhere, a security deposit on a cheap apartment, a thin buffer against the world that was waiting to consume me. It was the smart choice, the practical choice, the only choice that made sense for 2 orphans with nothing. What is the other option, I asked. Harold Prescott looked at me for a long moment. His eyes searched my face as if he was looking for something specific, as if he was trying to determine whether I was ready to hear what he had to say next. Then he reached into the envelope and pulled out something I had not noticed before, a key. It was old iron, heavy and ornate, with intricate scrollwork on the bow and rust settling into the grooves. It looked like something from another century, something that belonged in a museum or a storybook, out in the hands of an 18-year-old orphan sitting on a concrete bench outside a children's home. This was to be delivered to you on your 18th birthday, he said. Not a day before, not a day after. Your grandmother was very specific about that. She made me promise. I took the key. It was cold in my palm, surprisingly heavy, solid in a way that nothing else in my life had felt solid for a very long time. Real in a way that made everything else seem slightly less real by comparison. What does it open? Her house, he said. Your house now. I stared at the key, trying to understand. My grandmother had abandoned us. She had left us at a bus station with nothing but a note. She had never called, never written, never tried to find us. For 10 years she had been a ghost, a myth, a wound that would not heal. And now she had left me a key. There is one more thing, Harold said. He reached into the envelope again and pulled out a smaller envelope sealed with wax that had cracked with age. My name was written on the front in a shaky, elegant script that pulled at something deep in my memory. A birthday card, maybe. A note left on my pillow when I was very young. The handwriting of someone who had once loved me before everything fell apart. She asked me to give you this, he said. You are not to open it until you reach the house, until you stand inside and see what she left behind. I took the envelope. It weighed almost nothing, just a few sheets of paper. But it felt heavier than the key, heavier than the cardboard box, heavier than all 18 years of my life combined. Mr. Prescott, I said, why are you doing this? Why did you come here yourself? You could have sent a letter. You could have made a phone call. He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the gray sky. Because your grandmother was my client for 30 years, he said. Because she was my friend. Because she asked me to promise that when you turned 18, I would find you. I would put this key in your hand, and I would tell you something, what? That she never stopped looking for you, that she wrote you letters every week for 10 years. Over 500 letters, and every single one of them is waiting for you in that house. The world tilted. 500 letters, 10 years of letters. Letters written every week without fail. Letters that had never arrived. Letters that I had never known existed. She wrote to us. My voice cracked. I hated that it cracked. I had spent years building walls to keep my emotions hidden where no one could see them and use them against me. But this broke through every defense I had. Every week, Harold said, without fail, for 10 years, until the day she died. Then why did we never receive them? He shook his head slowly, and I saw something that looked like old anger in his eyes. Anger that had simmered for years without an outlet. The foster care system, he said. Children in state custody are protected. Their locations are confidential. Direct contact between children and family members who have surrendered custody is not permitted without approval from the courts. Every letter Eleanor sent was returned. Address unknown. Recipient no longer at this location. Return to sender. The system swallowed them all. I looked down at the key in my hand, the rusted iron, the ornate scrollwork, the weight of it pressing into my palm. She did not abandon you, Ethan, Harold said quietly. She saved you, and she spent the rest of her life trying to find a way back to you. He stood up slowly, placed a business card on the bench beside me, and looked at me one final time. I can help with the legal matters whenever you are ready, he said, but the choice is yours. Sell the land and take the money, or go to Nebraska and find out what your grandmother left behind. That is not my decision to make. Then he walked to his car, a battered sedan that had seen better decades, and drove away. And I sat there on that concrete bench with a rusty key in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other, and tried to remember how to breathe. I found Marcus in the back corner of the cafeteria, sitting alone at a table scarred with years of carved initials and spilled food. He was picking at a sandwich, not eating, just tearing it into smaller and smaller pieces. It was a habit he had developed years ago, a way of pretending to eat when the knot in his stomach made actual eating impossible. He looked up as I approached. His expression shifted from weariness to guarded curiosity. You were gone a long time, he said. What did Langley want? It was not Langley. I sat down across from him and told him everything. The lawyer, the property, the taxes, the development company's offer. The 500 letters waiting in a house neither of us had ever seen. With every word, I watched my brother's face cycle through emotions. Confusion, disbelief, anger. And underneath it all, buried so deep, he probably did not even know it was there, a flicker of something dangerous. Hope. When I finished, Marcus was quiet for a long time. He had stopped tearing his sandwich. His hands were flat on the table, pressed hard against the scarred wood, as if he needed something solid to hold on to. So she left us a house, he finally said. His voice was carefully flat. The woman who dumped us at a bus station left us a house and hundreds of letters explaining why she threw us away like garbage. The lawyer says she did not throw us away. He says she saved us. There is a reason she did what she did. There is always a reason. Marcus's voice was bitter now, sharp enough to cut. People always have reasons. Does not make it hurt less. Does not make up for 10 years of thinking no one in the world wanted us. I know. Do you? He looked at me, really looked, and I saw the decade of pain written in his eyes. The loneliness, the rejection, the endless cycle of temporary placements and broken promises. Do you know what it was like for me? You were always the strong one, Ethan. You could handle it. But I was 8 years old when she left us. 8. I did not understand anything. All I knew was that the one person who was supposed to love us did not want us anymore. I know Marcus. I hated her. His voice cracked. Every night for 10 years I lay in bed and I hated her. I imagined what I would say if I ever saw her again. All the things I would scream at her. All the ways I would make her understand what she did to us. And now, he shook his head, looking away. Now she is dead, and I never got to say any of it. Instead, she left us a house and a pile of letters, and some lawyer shows up to tell us it was all a misunderstanding. I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. We did not touch often. We had not been raised to be touchers. Physical affection was not something the system encouraged. But in that moment, I needed him to feel that he was not alone, that whatever came next, we were in it together. Come with me, I said. What? Come with me to Nebraska, see the house, read the letters, find out what really happened. And then what? Live happily ever after in some falling apart farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. I do not know. Maybe. Or maybe we read the letters and they do not explain anything and we come back and take the money and go our separate ways. But at least we will know. At least we will not spend the rest of our lives wondering. Marcus stared at me for a long moment. I could see the war happening behind his eyes. The anger that wanted to reject everything to protect himself by refusing to hope. And the small, fragile part of him that wanted desperately to believe there was more to the story than what we had been told. 6 weeks, he finally said. I have got 6 weeks left here. They are not going to let me just walk out. The lawyer is working on it. He says he can get a temporary release. Special circumstances. Special circumstances. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. That is a first. Nobody has ever called us special before. Is that a yes? He was quiet for another long moment. Then he nodded. Just once, barely perceptible. Fine, one trip. We go. We look. We read the letters. And when it turns out to be nothing, when there are no answers, when she was just another person who threw us away, you do not get to be surprised. You do not get to be hurt. You chose this. I know, I said. But the truth was I did not know anything at all. I did not know what we would find in that house. I did not know what the letters would say. I did not know if the answers we were looking for even existed. All I knew was that I had to try. That after 10 years of believing I was unwanted, I had to know the truth, even if the truth hurt worse than the lie. Harold Prescott worked fast. Within 3 days, he had secured a temporary release for Marcus. The paperwork cited family emergency and estate matters requiring the presence of both beneficiaries. Mrs. Langley signed the forms with visible reluctance, her lips pressed into a thin line that said she thought this was a waste of everyone's time. She was wrong, but she would never know that. The morning we left, the sky was heavy with clouds that threatened rain, but never delivered. We stood at the bus station with our cardboard boxes and our doubts watching the Greyhound pull up to the curb. It was a battered old bus, gray and road-worn, the kind that served routes too small and unprofitable for anyone to bother maintaining properly. The driver was a heavy man with kind eyes and a Nebraska Cornhuskers cap. He looked at us as we climbed aboard. Two skinny kids with cardboard boxes and expressions that said we were either running towards something or away from something, and he had been driving long enough to know we probably did not know which. Where you boys headed? Alder Creek, I said. He nodded slowly. Long way from here. You got family out there. I hesitated. Did we? Did a dead grandmother and an empty house count as family? Did 500 unread letters count as a connection? Something like that, I finally said. He nodded again and pulled the door closed. The bus lurched forward and we left the only world we had ever known behind. The journey took 7 hours. 7 hours of watching the world change through the smudged window of that Greyhound bus. The tight grid of city streets gave way to suburbs, then to small towns, then to nothing at all. Just fields, endless fields, stretching to the horizon in every direction. Winter wheat lying dormant under the gray sky, waiting for spring to call it back to life. Farmhouses sitting alone in the middle of nowhere, small and isolated, each one its own tiny island, in a sea of brown and gold. The sky got bigger as we drove. That was the thing that struck me most. In the city, you only see the sky in pieces in the narrow gaps between buildings. Out here, it went on forever. It pressed down from above and stretched out in every direction, making everything else seem small by comparison. I had never felt so small in my life, and I had never felt so free. The bus stopped twice, once at a gas station in a town so small, it did not even have a name on the map, just a crossroads with a water tower and a grain elevator. Once at a rest stop where the only building was a concrete block with restrooms and a vending machine that sold coffee for 50 cents. I bought 2 cups, gave one to Marcus. He took it without a word. It was terrible coffee, but it was hot, and we drank it standing in a parking lot in the middle of nowhere, with the wind pulling at our jackets and the sky stretching out above us like an ocean turned upside down. Marcus sat beside me in silence for most of the trip, his forehead pressed against the window, his breath fogging the glass. I could not tell if he was watching the scenery or just staring at nothing. Lost in thoughts he was not ready to share. Somewhere around hour 4, he finally spoke. What if it is all a lie? I looked at him. The letters, the explanation. What if it is all something she made up to make herself feel better? People do that, you know. They convince themselves they had good reasons for the terrible things they did. They rewrite history so they can sleep at night. Maybe. Maybe. He turned to look at me, his gray eyes sharp with challenge. That is all you have got. I do not know what the truth is, Marcus. I do not know if she had good reasons or bad reasons or no reasons at all. All I know is that I have spent 10 years believing one story, and now there might be another story, and I need to know which one is real. And if the first story was right, if she really did just throw us away because we were too much trouble. I was quiet for a long moment, watching the fields roll past outside the window, the endless flatness of it. A general store with a sagging porch and rocking chairs out front, a post office the size of a garden shed, a diner with red vinyl booths visible through the window and a neon sign that flickered the word open in uncertain bursts, a feed store with bags of grain stacked outside under a faded awning. It was 3 in the afternoon and the streets were nearly empty. A pickup truck rumbled past the driver, raising 2 fingers off the steering wheel in a wave that seemed directed at no one and everyone at the same time. A dog lay sleeping in a patch of sunlight outside the hardware store. An old man sat on a bench outside the barber shop reading a newspaper that was probably a week old. The air was different here. That was the first thing I noticed when we stepped off the bus. It smelled like earth and hay and something clean and sharp that I had no name for. The silence was different too. Not the absence of noise, but a different kind of noise. Wind in the grass. Birds calling from somewhere distant. The low hum of a tractor working a field miles away. The bus driver handed us our cardboard boxes and tipped his cap. Good luck, boys, he said. Whatever you are looking for, I hope you find it. The bus pulled away and we stood there on the cracked sidewalk. 2 city kids with cardboard boxes and worn-out shoes, staring down a road that disappeared into fields that stretched all the way to the edge of the world. Marcus looked at me. His face was pale. The anger was gone now, replaced by something rawer, something younger. He looked like the 8-year-old boy I remembered from that bus station 10 years ago, scared and trying not to show it. Now what he said. I pulled out the map Harold had given me, a hand-drawn sketch showing the property's location relative to the town. 4 miles down a road called Sawmill Road, past something labeled Old Mill Ruins, left fork at a tree marked with an X. We walk, I said. And so we did. 2 brothers with cardboard boxes under their arms, walking down a gravel road into the dying light of a Nebraska afternoon, heading toward a house we had never seen left to us by a woman we thought had thrown us away. The wind picked up as we walked, cutting through our thin jackets with a cold that seemed to seep into our bones. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. Everything that mattered was waiting for us at the end of that road, and we were almost there. The walk was long, longer than I expected. The road out of town was paved for about a mile, then turned to gravel, then turned to dirt. It wound through fields and past farmhouses and through stands of cottonwood trees with bare branches reaching toward the gray sky like the fingers of old men grasping at something they could no longer hold. The wind cut through our thin jackets with a cold that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not just from the sky, but from the ground itself, rising through the soles of our shoes and settling into our bones. This was a different kind of cold than the city. In the city, the cold bounced off concrete and glass and came at you from angles you could predict. Out here, it came from the open spaces, from the miles and miles of nothing between you and the horizon, and there was nowhere to hide from it. Marcus walked beside me in silence. His breath was visible in the cold air. His face was set in that hard expression I had seen so many times over the years, the mask he wore when he was trying not to feel anything. But I knew him better than anyone alive. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched in his pockets, the way his eyes kept moving, scanning the unfamiliar landscape like a soldier entering hostile territory. He was scared. We both were. After about an hour, I saw it. A mailbox rusted and tilting to one side, half swallowed by overgrown bushes. The name painted on it was barely visible. the letters faded by years of sun and rain and neglect. Cole. I stopped walking. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips, in the soles of my feet. This is it, I said. A gravel driveway, now more weeds than gravel, led away from the road and disappeared into a tunnel of trees. The branches met overhead, blocking out what little light was left in the gray afternoon sky, creating a passage into shadow. It looked like a doorway into another world, a world that had been waiting for us, a world that had been holding its breath for 10 years. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us moving. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked. His voice was quiet. The anger was gone, now replaced by something that sounded almost like a prayer. "No," I admitted, "but I am going anyway." I started down the driveway, my feet crunching on the gravel and weeds. After a moment, I heard Marcus's footsteps behind me. He had not said yes. He had not said he was ready. But he was following, and that was enough. The tunnel of trees went on for maybe 100 yards. The light grew dimmer, filtered through bare branches that seemed to press in from all sides. The air was colder here, damper, heavy with the smell of rotting leaves and old wood, and the particular silence of places that have not heard a human voice in a very long time. And then the trees opened up, and I saw the house. It was smaller than I had imagined from the photographs. A simple wooden farmhouse, 2 stories tall, with a wraparound porch and a tin roof streaked with rust. The paint had once been white, but years of sun and rain had faded it to the color of old bones. Some of the windows were dark and empty. Others had been boarded up with plywood that had warped and split over time. The porch sagged dramatically on one side, and wild roses had climbed halfway up the posts, their thorns tangled with dead leaves in the memory of summers long past. But there was something about it, something that made me stop and stare and forget to breathe. It was not just a ruin. It was not just an abandoned building waiting to collapse into the earth. There was a solidity to them, a stubbornness. The bones were still good. The walls were still straight. The chimney still stood proud against the gray sky. It looked like a house that had been waiting, a house that had refused to fall down because it knew somehow that someone was coming. "Home, sweet home," Marcus said quietly. There was no sarcasm in his voice now, only wonder. I walked through the tall grass toward the porch, my legs trembling with every step. The wooden boards creaked under my weight, but they held. The front door was swollen with moisture, warped in its frame, but the keyhole was still visible, still waiting. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key. The old iron was warm now from being carried against my body. The rust had left orange stains on my fingers, but it fit into the lock like it had been made for this moment, like the lock and the key had been waiting 10 years for this reunion. I turned it. For a second, nothing happened. The lock was stiff, the mechanism frozen with years of disuse. I put my shoulder into the door, pushing with all my weight, feeling the old wood groan and resist. And then, with a sound like a long exhale, like a house releasing a breath it had been holding for a decade, the door gave way. It swung open and a wave of cold, musty air washed over me. The smell of dust in old wood and time itself. The smell of a place that had been sealed and waiting for someone to come back. I stepped inside and everything changed. The darkness was thick and heavy. The only light came from the gaps in the boarded windows, thin slivers of gray that cut across the floor like pale scars. Dust motes danced in these beams, swirling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost alive, as if the house was showing us it still had breath in its lungs. As my eyes adjusted, the room took shape around me. A single open space that served as living room and kitchen and dining area combined. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and black with an old ash. The furniture was still there, a worn armchair with a faded floral pattern, a simple wooden table with 2 chairs, a sagging bookshelf filled with old hardcovers whose spines had cracked and faded. Everything was covered in white dust cloths like shrouds laid over the bodies of the dead. Like someone had tried to protect these things, to preserve them, knowing that one day someone would come back to claim them. But it was the walls that stopped me. Pictures, dozens of them, framed photographs covering every available surface. And they were all of us. Marcus as a toddler, sitting in a high chair with mashed carrots smeared across his face, laughing at something off camera. Me at 6 years old, missing my front teeth, holding up a crayon drawing that I could not quite make out in the dim light. Both of us standing at the bus station just before she left us, our small faces confused and scared and trusting in a way that we would never be trusting again. But those were old photos, those I might have expected. What I did not expect were the newer ones. A school picture from my third grade year. The one where I was wearing a shirt 2 sizes too big that had been donated by some church group. Marcus's fifth grade class photo. His face thin and serious, already learning to look tough in a world that punished softness. My seventh grade yearbook picture. The one where I had a black eye from a fight I got into with a kid who said orphans were born losers. Marcus at 12 looking tired and angry and so thin I could count his ribs through his shirt. Me at 14 trying to smile for the camera and not quite succeeding. Year after year, grade after grade, every single school photograph they had ever taken of us arranged chronologically across the wall like a timeline of our lives. A gallery of two boys growing up watched from a distance by someone who could never reach them. How Marcus whispered. His voice was barely audible. How did she get these? I did not answer. I did not have an answer. All I could do was stare at the walls of this house and try to understand what I was seeing. She had been watching us, following us, collecting these images, somehow tracking us through the system year after year, never letting us disappear completely from her sight. For 10 years she had been there, invisible, silent, unable to speak to us or touch us or tell us she loved us. But there, always there, I felt something crack inside my chest. Something I had kept locked away for so long I had forgotten it was there. The anger, the certainty that I was unloved. The story I had told myself every night for 10 years, the story that had become the foundation of who I was. It was cracking, and I did not know what would be left when it broke apart. Ethan. Marcus's voice pulled me back. He was standing near the fireplace looking down at the floor. There is something here. The boards are different. I walked over to where he stood. The floorboards near the hearth were newer than the rest, a slightly different color, less worn by years of footsteps, and one of them had a small notch near the edge, almost invisible if you were not looking for it. Marcus was already on his knees digging his fingers into the notch. The board resisted, then lifted with a low groan. Beneath it was a dark, hollow space, and inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a metal box. An old ammunition box, army, green, the kind that soldiers used to store supplies. It was dented and scratched, but solid, real, heavy with the weight of years. When I lifted it out, the latch was stiff with age, but it opened. And inside were letters, hundreds of them, bundled with twine, organized by year, each bundle labeled in the same elegant handwriting I had seen on the sealed envelope. The handwriting of someone whose hands had grown shakier with each passing year, but who had never stopped writing, never stopped reaching for children who could not reach back. 10 years, 10 bundles, more than 500 letters, all addressed to us, all unopened, all returned by a system designed to protect us from the very person who loved us most. I reached for the first bundle with trembling hands. The paper was thin and yellowed at the edges, fragile with age. The twine was rough against my fingers as I untied it. I pulled out the first letter, unfolded it carefully, and began to read. My dearest boys, it has been 1 week since I left you. It is the longest week of my life. I know you must hate me now. I know you must be confused and scared and angry. I know you are asking why. Why would Grandma do this? Why would she leave us alone? I wish I could be there to explain. I wish I could hold you in my arms and tell you everything. But I cannot. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What I can do is write. And so I will write to you every week for as long as I live. And maybe someday these words will reach you. Maybe someday you will understand. I did not abandon you, my boys. I saved you. The truth is far more dangerous than the lie you have been told. Your father was not a good man. I loved him once when he was young and full of promise. But something dark took root in him, and it grew until it consumed everything good that he had once been. He became addicted to gambling, cards and horses, and anything where he could risk money he did not have. He borrowed from people who should never be borrowed from. Dangerous people. People who do not forgive debts. By the time your mother died, he owed $80,000 to men who collect what they are owed by any means necessary. When he could not pay, he ran. He disappeared in the middle of the night, leaving me and leaving you to face his creditors alone. They came to this house, boys. 3 of them. Big men with cold eyes and voices that made no threats because they did not need to. They said you were collateral, insurance, leverage to force your father to pay what he owed. They wanted to take you, both of you. I could not let that happen. I could not let you become pawns in a game played by monsters. So I made the hardest decision of my life. The foster care system is cold. It is impersonal. It is often cruel. I know this. But the foster care system is also anonymous. A child in state custody is a file in a cabinet, a number in a database, invisible, protected, hidden from anyone who might want to find them. I drove you to that bus station. I pinned that note to your jacket, and I walked away with my heart breaking with every single step. I reported your father to the police that same night. 6 months later, he was arrested. He died in prison 3 years later. The men who threatened you are gone now, too. The danger has passed, but I could not reach you. Every letter I sent was returned. The very thing that saved you also kept you hidden from me. I am so sorry, my boys. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you, but I am not sorry for the choice I made, because you are alive, because you are safe. I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Your grandmother, Eleanor. I had to stop reading. The words were dissolving on the page, blurring into watercolor smears as tears ran down my face. She had not abandoned us. She had saved us. Everything I had believed for 10 years, every wall I had built, every night I had lain in the dark telling myself I was unwanted. All of it had been wrong. Beside me, Marcus was crying too. Not the angry tears I had seen from him so many times over the years. These were different, softer, more broken. The tears of a boy who had just learned that the hatred he had carried for 10 years had been built on a lie. She saved us, he whispered. All this time. All this time I hated her, and she saved us. For a moment we just sat there on the dusty floor surrounded by photographs and letters, and the ghost of a woman who had given everything for us. And I thought maybe this was enough. Maybe the letters were the answer. Maybe we could read them all and grieve and heal and move forward. But then Marcus stood up. His face had changed. The softness was gone. The tears were still on his cheeks, but his jaw was set and his eyes were hard, and I recognized that look. It was the look he wore right before he broke something. No, he said. What? No. He was pacing now, his boots leaving tracks in the dust. I do not accept this. I do not care what she wrote. I do not care about her reasons. Marcus, she knew. His voice was rising. She knew the system was cruel. She wrote it herself right there in that letter. The foster care system is cold. It is often cruel. She knew and she put us in it anyway. Do you know what happened to me in that second placement, Ethan? Do you know what happened when I was 10 years old? I stared at him. He had never talked about the second placement. In 10 years, he had never said a word about it. There were things in both our histories that lived in rooms we did not open. Doors we kept locked because the things behind them were too dark to face. I was 10, he said. His voice was shaking now, but not with sadness, with something older and deeper and more dangerous. 10 years old, and the man they placed me with. He hit me every single night for 6 months. Every single night, Ethan. He hit me with his belt, with his hands, with whatever was close. And when the social worker finally came and found the bruises, you know what happened? They moved me. That is all. Just moved me. Like I was a piece of furniture that did not fit in one room, so they put it in another. Marcus, she chose that for us. She had a choice and she chose that. Maybe those men were dangerous. Maybe they would have taken us. But maybe she could have fought them. Maybe she could have gone to the police sooner. Maybe she could have hidden us herself instead of handing us to strangers. Instead, she gave us to a system that let a grown man beat a 10-year-old boy every night for 6 months. He was standing at the door now, his hand on the frame, his knuckles white. You can sit here and read her letters and forgive her if you want, he said. But I am not ready for that. I do not know if I will ever be ready for that. Then he walked out into the gathering dark. The screen door slammed behind him, and the sound echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. I sat on the floor surrounded by letters and photographs and the ruins of everything I thought I knew. Part of me wanted to go after him, to find him and hold him and tell him it was going to be okay. But I did not, because I was not sure it was going to be okay, because he was right about some of it. Not all of it, but some. Eleanor had made a choice, and that choice had consequences she could not have fully predicted. She had saved us from one kind of danger and delivered us into another. The system had not been kind to either of us, but it had been especially cruel to Marcus. He had every right to be angry. He had every right to need time. I sat alone in that house as night fell. The darkness deepened until the only light was the pale glow of stars through the gaps in the boarded windows. I did not sleep. I read letters by the light of a candle I found in a kitchen drawer. Letter after letter. Her garden, the Nebraska winters, the neighbors who checked on her, and woven through everything her love for us, constant and unchanging like the turning of the earth. I saw your school picture today, Ethan. You look so much like your mother. The same serious eyes, the same stubborn jaw. I wish I could tell you about her. Marcus got into a fight at school. I heard through the lawyer. They say he broke a boy's nose. I should not say this, but I am proud of him. He has fire in him. Do not let them put it out. Christmas was hard this year. I set 2 extra places at the table. Your grandfather thinks I am foolish, but I cannot help it. You belong here. The later letters were harder to read. Her handwriting grew shakier. The paper was sometimes stained with what might have been tears. She wrote about doctors and medications and the knowledge that time was running out. I am tired, my boys. So tired. The doctors say my heart is giving out. But if I am going to die, I want to die here, in the house where I was born, where I dream of you every night. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I heard the front door creak open. Footsteps on the old wood floor. Marcus appeared in the candlelight, his face raw from the cold, his eyes red. He did not apologize. He did not explain where he had been. He just sat down across from me on the floor and looked at the letters spread around me. I want to read more, he said quietly. I handed him a bundle. We read together in silence until the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows. 2 brothers on a dusty floor learning the story of a woman they had misunderstood for a decade, 1 letter at a time. That morning we found the oak tree. The last letter Eleanor ever wrote, dated just 1 week before she died, was barely legible. The words shook across the page in a hand that was losing its fight with time. The money is hidden where it has always been hidden, under the watchful eye of the old oak. You will know it when you see it. The biggest tree on the property. There is a hollow in the trunk about 10 feet up. Inside you will find everything you need to pay the taxes and keep this land. We walked outside into the pale morning. The property stretched out around us. 47 acres of Nebraska farmland. Fields that had once grown corn and soybeans, now lying fallow, overgrown with weeds and wild grasses. A barn at the edge of the clearing with its red paint faded to pink and its doors hanging open on rusted hinges. And there at the western edge of the property, standing alone against the morning sky, was the oak. It was massive, ancient, a giant among trees. Its trunk was so thick that 3 men could not have wrapped their arms around it. Its branches spread out like the arms of a guardian watching over everything below. It had been there for 100 years, maybe more. It would be there for 100 years after we were gone. I climbed. The bark was rough, providing plenty of handholds. My muscles burned and my fingers scraped against the wood. About 10 feet up, where a massive lower limb met the trunk, there was a hollow, a dark opening like an eye socket staring out at the world. I reached inside past cobwebs and rotting leaves, and my fingers touched something solid, wrapped in oilcloth, heavy, real. Inside the biscuit tin were stacks of bill bundled with rubber bands, 20s and 50s and hundreds packed so tightly the tin could barely close. We counted it on the cold ground beneath the tree, our breath-making clouds in the morning air. $12,000. The taxes are 11.5, Marcus said. She saved enough. She actually saved enough. Every penny she had scrimped and saved over years. Every luxury denied. Every choice made to put money aside for 2 boys she might never see again. She had known she might die before we turned 18. And still she had prepared for this moment. Still she had believed we would come. We paid the taxes that same week, walked into the county clerk's office in town, and put a cashier's check on the counter. The woman behind the desk, a woman named Mabel, who had known Eleanor for 30 years, stamped the documents with a series of loud, satisfying thuds. Each stamp felt like a victory. Each stamp felt like another piece of our grandmother's dream becoming real. The Cole property is officially yours, she said. Free and clear. Free and clear. I believed those words. I believed the hard part was over. I was wrong. It was 4 days later when Walter Pruitt showed up at our door. He was a man in his early 70s with a face like cracked leather and hands that were permanently stained with decades of work. He ran the general store in town. He had been Eleanor's friend for 30 years. He brought bread and eggs and coffee and a warning. Be careful of a man named Dean Mercer, he said. Ridgewater Development. He has been buying up land around here for 8 years. Your grandmother spent her last years fighting him off. He tried every trick in the book, Walter continued. Legal threats, lowball offers, fake debts. One time he even tried to claim she owed money to a contractor who never existed. What happened? She beat him. Every single time. Had that lawyer of hers file counterclaim after counterclaim. Cost her a fortune in legal fees, but she would not give an inch. She knew what he was, and she refused to let him win. Then Earl Dawson came, a farmer who had worked the land next to our grandmother's for 3 decades. His wife Dottie brought apple pie. Earl brought something else, a worn envelope containing documents Eleanor had given him before she died. She wanted someone to keep copies, Earl said. Just in case. Inside was a paper trail that went back years. Dean Mercer had been running the same scam across the county. Fake creditors, forged documents, manufactured debts designed to drive vulnerable landowners into bankruptcy so he could buy their property at auction for pennies. 7 families that we could count. Probably more. Eleanor had been collecting evidence on all of it. Quietly, patiently, for years. She knew he would come for you, Dottie said. She knew that the moment she was gone, he would try his tricks on whoever inherited this land. So she built a case, not just for herself, for everyone he had ever hurt. I asked why she had not used the evidence while she was alive. Earl shook his head. She was waiting. She knew if she went after Mercer directly, he would retaliate. He would drag out the legal battles until she was too old and too tired to fight. But if she waited and let him think he had won, he would get careless. He would try his tricks again when you boys showed up. And this time there would be enough evidence to bring him down for good. I sat there staring at the documents. My grandmother had not just left us a house and some money and 500 letters. She had left us a weapon, a carefully assembled arsenal of evidence against a man who had made a career of preying on people who could not fight back. And she had trusted us to use it. Dean Mercer came 3 days later. I knew who he was the moment he walked into Rosie's diner where Marcus and I were drinking coffee. Everything about him radiated a kind of polished menace. He was in his late 40s, tall and lean, with graying hair slicked back from a face that was handsome in a cold, calculated way. His suit was expensive. His shoes were polished. His smile was the smile of a man who had learned exactly how to arrange his face to put people at ease before he took everything they had. He slid into the booth across from us without being invited. Ethan Cole, he said, and you must be Marcus. I am Dean Mercer. Ridgewater Development. I was so sorry to hear about your grandmother. She was a remarkable woman. What do you want, Mr. Mercer? Just to talk. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. It seems there has been a complication with your inheritance. Another claimant has come forward, a man named Richard Cole, your father's cousin, apparently. He believes he has a valid claim to half the estate. There was no Richard Cole. Our father had been an only child. Our grandmother had never mentioned any other family on his side. The name was a fabrication, another lie in a long career of lies. His claim appears legitimate. Mercer continued, his voice smooth and reasonable. Boom. This will have to be settled in court. Could take months, years even. Legal fees can be very expensive for young men with limited resources. Or, he leaned forward, I am prepared to offer you $30,000 for the property. You walk away with a substantial sum. No lawyers, no court, no unpleasantness. I looked at the document in my hands, at the name Richard Cole. At the legal language designed to confuse and intimidate two kids who had never hired a lawyer or read a contract or done anything more complicated than surviving one day to the next. $30,000. It was more money than I had ever imagined. It was enough to start a life somewhere far from here. But I thought about the photographs on the walls, about the letters in the cedar box, about a woman who had spent 10 years fighting this man and collecting the evidence to destroy him. And I thought about the 7 families he had defrauded, 7 families who had lost their land and their livelihoods and their histories to a man in a polished suit with a predator's smile. No, I said, excuse me. No, we are not selling. Not to you, not to anyone. His smile flickered. Just for a second, just long enough for me to see the thing that lived underneath it. Something cold and patient and accustomed to winning. You have 72 hours to reconsider, he said. After that, the lawyers take over. And trust me, boys, you do not want that. He walked out and the bell above the door jingled behind him. The cheerful sound was completely at odds with the threat that still hung in the air. That should have been the worst of it. It was not. 48 hours later, Dean Mercer came to the house. He pulled up the driveway in a black SUV. 2 men got out first. Big men, professional men. The kind of men who are hired specifically because their presence says things that words are not allowed to say. Mercer followed them out of the passenger seat with the ease of someone accustomed to having muscle at his back. I was outside repairing a fence post. I straightened up and watched them approach. My hands were shaking, but I kept them at my sides. Ethan, Mercer said. His voice was friendly in a way that made my skin crawl. I was hoping we could talk. I have nothing to say to you. That is a shame. Because I have something to say to you. He walked closer. The 2 men flanked him like bookends. I know about the evidence your grandmother collected, he said. I know you have given it to Prescott. I know he is planning to file charges. I said nothing. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to call Prescott and tell him you have changed your mind. You are going to accept my offer for the property. And you are going to hand over every piece of evidence your grandmother ever gathered. And if I do not, Mercer smiled. It was not a smile. It was the baring of teeth. Your brother is 17 years old, still a minor, still technically under the supervision of the state. It would be a shame if someone reported that he was living in an unsafe environment. No running water, no legal guardian, a condemned structure with a collapsing roof. It would be a real shame if he got sent back into the system. Somewhere far away, somewhere you could never find him. The words hit me like a fist to the chest. I could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything except stand there and feel the ground shifting under my feet. They could do it, with the right connections, the right paperwork, the right phone call to the right person. They could take Marcus away from me. They could scatter us to opposite ends of the country. They could undo everything we had found and everything we had started to build and everything our grandmother had sacrificed. They could make us disappear into the system again. And this time there would be no key, no letters, no way back. You have 24 hours, Mercer said. Think about what matters to you. Think about your brother and make the smart choice. He turned and walked back to the SUV. The 2 men followed. The door slammed shut and the vehicle rolled down the driveway and disappeared into the trees. I stood there in the yard for a long time after they left. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. The cold March wind cut through my jacket, but I could not feel it. For the first time since we had arrived at this house, for the first time since I had turned that iron key in the lock and stepped inside and seen the photographs on the walls and read the letters and learned the truth, I felt truly afraid. Not for myself, for Marcus. For the possibility that after everything we had been through, after 10 years of separation and the slow grinding cruelty of a system that treated children like inventory, we could be torn apart again. By the same system. By the same indifference. By a man in an expensive suit who saw 2 orphans standing on valuable land and calculated exactly how to break them. I looked up at the house. At the porch we had not yet repaired. At the windows we had not yet uncovered. At the walls inside that held 10 years of photographs. She had not given up. For 10 years she had written letters that were returned. She had collected photographs. She had gathered evidence. She had saved money penny by penny. She had built a case and prepared a weapon, and trusted that someday her grandsons would come home and finish what she had started. And I would not let her down. I went inside. Marcus was at the kitchen table reading letters. He looked up and saw my face and knew immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" he said. I told him everything. Mercer, the threat, the 24 hours. When I finished, his face was white, but his jaw was set and his hands were steady on the table. "He is not sending me back," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, but there was iron in it. "No one is sending me anywhere. Not ever again." I picked up the phone and called Harold Prescott. Then I called Earl Dawson. Then Walter Pruitt. Then Peggy from the post office. One by one they came, driving up the gravel driveway in pickup trucks and old sedans, bringing food and documents in the kind of quiet determination that only exists in people who have lived long enough to know what is worth fighting for. We gathered around the old wooden table as night fell. The kerosene lamp cast warm shadows on the walls, and the photographs of two boys growing up watched over us from every direction. Harold spoke first. He had been on the phone all afternoon. He had filed emergency guardianship papers. As of 4 o'clock that day, I was Marcus's legal guardian. The state had no authority to remove him from my custody without a court order, and no court would grant that order once they learned what Mercer was trying to do. Marcus looked at me when Harold said the words. Legal guardian. His eyes were wide, and for a moment he looked like the 8-year-old boy I remembered from the bus station. The boy who had trusted me to protect him. The boy I had failed to protect for 10 years. But not anymore. "I have the evidence ready to go," Harold continued. "The state attorney general's office will want to see everything, but someone needs to drive it to Lincoln tomorrow morning. I can go, but I will go," I said. Everyone at the table looked at me. "It is our land," I said, "our fight. Our grandmother built this case. I will deliver it myself." Harold studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I will have everything organized for you by morning," he said, "and I will be available by phone the entire time you are there. But you are right. This should come from you." Walter Pruitt leaned back in his chair. "The rest of us will be right here," he said, "round the clock. Nobody gets near this property without us knowing about it." Earl Dawson nodded. His weathered face was set with the kind of resolve that comes from 30 years of working land that does not care whether you succeed or fail. "Your grandmother was a good woman," he said. "She loved this place. She loved you boys. We are not going to let her down." I looked around the table at these people, these strangers who had become something more in the span of a few days. These neighbors who had shown up without being asked, who had offered help without expecting anything in return, who had opened their hearts to two boys they had never met, simply because our grandmother had been their friend. This was what she had wanted for us. Not just the house, not just the land, this. A table full of people who cared. A community that would fight for you because you were one of their own. A place where you belonged not because of what you owned, but because of who you were connected to. I looked at Marcus across the table. He was watching me, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, my brother smiled. It was small, barely there, gone almost before it arrived. But I saw it, and it was enough. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow we finish this." I left before dawn. The sky was still black when I walked out to the driveway where Harold's battered sedan sat waiting. He had driven it out the night before and left the keys on the kitchen table with a note that said simply, "Bring them the truth." The engine turned over on the third try with a cough and a shudder that said this car had opinions about early mornings. Marcus stood on the porch watching me. He had not slept. Neither of us had. We had spent the hours after the meeting going through Eleanor's evidence, one more time organizing it, making sure nothing was missing, making sure the story it told was complete and undeniable. The manila folder sat on the passenger seat in Harold's old leather briefcase, heavy with the weight of years of patience and meticulous documentation. 7 families, 7 sets of forged documents, 7 land grabs executed with the precision of a man who had done this so many times he no longer thought of his victims as people. Just obstacles between him and what he wanted. "Be careful," Marcus said from the porch. "I will." He stood there in the gray light, his arms crossed against the cold, and I saw something in his face that I had never seen before. Not anger, not fear, concern. For me. My brother, who had spent 10 years building walls so high nobody could see over them, was standing on a porch in rural Nebraska, worried about whether I would be okay. I will be back by tonight, I said. I know, he said. Just come back. I pulled out of the driveway and onto Sawmill Road. The headlights cut through the pre-dawn darkness, illuminating the gravel and the dead grass on either side. The world was silent. No tractors, no birds. Just the hum of the engine and the crunch of tires on loose stone and the beating of my heart. Lincoln was 140 miles east. 3 hours of driving through country I had never seen on roads. I had never traveled toward a destination I had never imagined when I woke up on my birthday 2 weeks ago in a strip bed at Greenfield Children's Home. 2 weeks, 14 days. That was all the time that had passed since Harold Prescott walked into Mrs. Langley's office and changed everything. 14 days since I held a rusted iron key for the first time. 14 days since I learned that the woman I had hated for a decade had loved me more than I could comprehend. And now I was driving through the dark with a briefcase full of evidence, about to do the things she had spent her last years preparing for. The things she had not lived long enough to do herself. The sun came up somewhere east of Grand Island. It rose slow and enormous over the flat horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, setting fire to the frost that clung to the fields on either side of the highway. I had never seen a sunrise like that. In the city, the sun appeared suddenly popping up over buildings like a switch being flipped. Out here, it was a gradual thing, a slow reveal, the world going from black to blue to gold one shade at a time, and the sky so wide that the whole process seemed to take up half the earth. I thought about Eleanor as I drove, not the ghost I had carried for 10 years, not the villain of the story I had told myself every night in the dark, the real Eleanor, the woman who had planted tomatoes and written letters and set extra places at the table every Christmas. The woman who had driven her grandsons to a bus station and walked away knowing it would destroy her because the alternative was worse. I thought about what it must have cost her. Not the money, not the legal fees, not the years of fighting Dean Mercer and his lawyers and his manufactured debts. Those were just numbers. What it must have cost her in the places that could not be measured. The loneliness of an empty house, the silence where children's voices should have been, the particular agony of knowing your grandchildren are out there somewhere growing up without you believing you did not want them and being unable to say a single word to change it. 500 letters, every single week for 10 years, and every single one returned. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and kept driving. The state attorney general's office was in a modern building in downtown Lincoln, glass and steel and the hum of bureaucracy. I parked in a visitor spot and sat in the car for a full minute, staring at the briefcase on the passenger seat. My hands were shaking. I was 18 years old. I had no college degree, no legal training, no experience with anything more complicated than surviving another day in a system that did not care whether I lived or disappeared. And I was about to walk into a state government office and accuse a wealthy, connected businessman of a decade of criminal fraud. I picked up the briefcase. It was heavy in my hand, but the key in my pocket was heavier. The key Eleanor had saved for me. The key she had made Harold promise to deliver on my 18th birthday and not a day before. She had believed I would be ready. She had believed I would be strong enough. I got out of the car and walked inside. The receptionist directed me to the third floor. The office of the Consumer Protection Division. A woman named Patricia Langford met me in a conference room with gray carpet and fluorescent lights that reminded me uncomfortably of Greenfield. I was told you had information regarding land fraud in Cedar County, she said. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed professional, not unfriendly but not warm either. She had the manner of someone who had heard a lot of complaints and was reserving judgment until she saw evidence. I opened the briefcase and began to lay the documents out on the conference table. Folder by folder, family by family, year by year, the forged invoices from contractors who did not exist. The manufactured liens filed against properties owned by elderly widows and aging farmers. The fake claimants conjured from thin air to contest wills and tie up estates in litigation until the owners gave up and sold for pennies on the dollar. The bank records Harold had subpoenaed, showing payments from Ridgewater Development to county officials who were supposed to be protecting the people Mercer was robbing. Patricia Langford watched in silence as the table filled with paper. Her expression shifted gradually from professional skepticism to something harder and more focused. The expression of a prosecutor who has just been handed the case of her career. When I finished, there was a long silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside the window, the city of Lincoln went about its business, oblivious to the fact that in this small gray conference room, a boy from a children's home was laying out the blueprint of a man's destruction. "Who compiled this?" she asked finally. "My grandmother," I said, "Eleanor Cole. She spent years gathering it. She died 2 years ago before she could bring it to you herself." Patricia Langford looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes moved from my face to the documents spread across the table and back again. I could see her calculating, measuring the weight of what I had brought her against the cost of pursuing it, measuring me against the seriousness of what I was alleging. "How old are you?" she asked. 18. "And you drove here from Alder Creek this morning, by yourself?" "Yes, ma'am." She was quiet for another moment, then something shifted in her expression, a decision made. She picked up her phone and made a call. Within an hour, there were 4 people in the conference room: 2 investigators from the Consumer Protection Division, a prosecutor from the fraud unit named David Chen, who wore wire-rimmed glasses and spoke in the careful, measured tones of a man who understood the power of evidence, and a woman from the state police named Sergeant Hale, who took notes in a small leather-bound book and asked questions with the calm precision of someone who was already building a case in her head. I answered everything they asked. I told them about the property, about the back taxes, about Mercer's offer and his fake claimant Richard Cole, about his visit to the house with his 2 men and the way they stood behind him like a wall, about the threat against Marcus, about the 24 hours that were now almost up. David Chen leaned forward when I described the threat. He looked at Sergeant Hale. She looked back at him. Something passed between them. The silent communication of professionals who have just realized their case is bigger than they initially thought. They made copies of every document. They photographed the originals. They asked me to sign sworn statements. They made phone calls to the Cedar County Sheriff and to a judge whose name I did not catch. At one point, Patricia Langford left the room for 20 minutes and came back with a senior attorney. I had not met a tall man with silver temples who read through the files without speaking and then nodded once as if confirming something he had suspected for a long time. At 11:45 in the morning, less than 5 hours after I had walked through the front door, Patricia Langford looked at me across the conference table and said words that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "Mr. Cole, your grandmother did extraordinary work. This office is opening a formal investigation into Ridgewater development effective immediately. We will be seeking emergency warrants this afternoon." She paused, then she added something that was not strictly professional, but felt necessary. "You should know that what you did today took courage. Most people twice your age would not have had the nerve to walk in here and do what you just did. Eleanor would have been very proud." I nodded because I did not trust my voice. I shook her hand and David Chen's hand and Sergeant Hale's hand, and I walked out of the building into the bright Nebraska sunlight and stood in the parking lot for a full minute with my face turned up to the sky and my eyes closed and my heart beating with something that was not fear anymore. The drive back to Alder Creek took 3 hours, but it felt like 30 minutes. The fields blurred past the windows. The sky was enormous and blue and filled with the kind of light that makes everything look new. I drove with the windows down even though the March air was cold enough to make my fingers numb on the steering wheel. I needed to feel the wind. I needed to feel something real against my skin to remind me that this was actually happening. I called Harold from the road and told him what had happened. He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, slow and steady, the breathing of a man who had kept a promise for 30 years and was only now learning that it had been worth every single day of waiting. "She would be proud of you," he said. His voice was rough. My God, she would be proud. I called Marcus next. He picked up on the first ring. He must have been sitting with the phone in his hand. "It is done," I said. "They are opening an investigation. They are going for warrants today." Marcus did not say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick. "Good," he said. "That is good." I pulled into Alder Creek just after 2 in the afternoon. The town looked different somehow. The same buildings, the same main street, the same dog sleeping outside the hardware store. But it all looked different to me now, seen through the eyes of someone who had just done the hardest and most important thing he had ever done. I did not go home. I drove to the county courthouse instead. Something told me to be there. Something told me I needed to see this through to the end. I parked across the street and waited. At 3:17, two state police cruisers pulled up in front of the small brick building that housed Dean Mercer's local office. The officers who got out were not local. They wore state trooper uniforms, and they moved with the efficient purpose of people executing a plan that had been set in motion by forces larger than anything this small town had ever seen. They went inside. 10 minutes passed. 15. I sat in the car with the engine on and my hands on the steering wheel and my heart beating so hard I could hear it. Then the door opened and Dean Mercer came out. He was flanked by two troopers. His hands were behind his back. His wrists were in handcuffs. His expensive suit was rumpled. His slicked back hair had fallen across his forehead. He looked smaller than he had before. Diminished. All the power and menace stripped away, leaving behind just a man in wrinkled clothes being led to the back of a police car. He did not look around. He did not scan the street for witnesses. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, his face blank with the particular shock of a man who believed he was untouchable right up until the moment he was touched. I watched as they put him in the back of the cruiser, watched as the door closed, watched as the car pulled away from the curb and drove down Main Street past the general store and the diner and the post office and all the other buildings that belonged to a town he had been slowly strangling for 8 years. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, people who had come out of shops and offices to see what was happening. Some of them were families I recognized from the evidence. The Hendersons, whose farm Mercer had taken 3 years ago through a manufactured debt. Old Martha Vogel, whose husband had sold their property under duress 6 months before he died. They stood on the sidewalk and watched the cruiser drive away, and some of them were crying, and some of them were just standing there with their mouths open, and some of them were holding each other the way people hold each other when something they have prayed for finally comes to pass. Walter Pruitt was standing on the porch of the general store. His weathered face was split in a rare smile. He raised his hand to me across the street. Not a wave. A salute, the kind of gesture one man makes to another when words are not enough. Peggy was in the doorway of the post office, her hand over her mouth. Earl Dawson's pickup was parked outside the hardware store, and Earl was leaning against the tailgate with his arms crossed, nodding slowly like a man watching something he had waited a long time to see. "Your grandmother would have loved this," Walter said, later that evening when he came by the house. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, his weathered hands wrapped around the mug. She worked so hard to make it happen. She spent years getting ready for this day, and she never got to see it. "She saw it," I said. "I believe that." Somehow she saw it. I sat in the car for a few more minutes. Then I drove home. Marcus was on the porch when I pulled up the driveway. He stood up as I got out of the car. We looked at each other across the yard. "I saw them take him," he said. "Earl called. He told me." I nodded. "It is over," Marcus said. Not a question, a statement, a declaration, a line drawn between the world that was and the world that would be. "It is over," I said. We stood there in the late afternoon light. The fields stretched out around us, brown and gold and waiting for spring. The house stood behind Marcus, old and weathered and stubborn, and ours. The oak tree was visible at the far edge of the property, its bare branches dark against the pale sky. And then I remembered the envelope. The sealed envelope that Harold had given me on the bench outside Greenfield. The one with the cracked wax seal and my name written in Eleanor's shaky hand. The one I had been told not to open until I stood inside the house and saw what she had left behind. I had been carrying it in the inside pocket of my jacket for 2 weeks. Through the bus ride and the walk down Sawmill Road and the discovery of the photographs and the letters and the money in the oak tree and the confrontation with Mercer and the drive to Lincoln and back. Through all of it, the envelope had been against my chest, close to my heart, waiting. I reached into my jacket and pulled it out. Marcus saw it and went still. He remembered. He had been there when Harold described it. "The envelope she asked me to give you. You are not to open it until you reach the house." We went inside. The late afternoon sun was slanting through the windows we had uncovered in the past week, casting long rectangles of golden light across the floor. The dust cloths were gone now. The furniture was exposed. The photographs on the walls were illuminated for the first time in years, our childhood faces watching us from their frames. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table Eleanor had eaten at for decades, the same table where she had written 500 letters to children who could not write back. Marcus sat across from me. I broke the wax seal carefully. The old wax crumbled at my touch, falling onto the table in rust-colored flakes. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not a long letter, not a detailed explanation, not a list of instructions or a map or a legal document. Just one page, in her handwriting. The letters shaky but clear, written with the deliberate care of someone who knew this might be the last thing she ever wrote to the people she loved most. My dear Ethan, if you are reading this, you are standing in my house, your house now, and you chose to come here instead of taking the money and walking away. I knew you would. I knew it the way I know the sun will rise tomorrow, and the corn will grow in June, and the oak tree will still be standing when everything else has changed. I did not leave you this house because it is valuable. It is not. It is old, and it needs more work than one woman could do in a lifetime. I left it to you because you need a place to belong. You and Marcus both. You need walls that know your name. You need a door that opens when you turn the key. You need a piece of earth that is yours and that no one can take from you. That is what home is. Not a building, not four walls and a roof. Home is the place that waits for you. The place that holds your shape even when you are gone. The place that knows you are coming back even when you do not know it yourself. I am sorry I could not be there when you arrived. I am sorry I could not see your face when you turned the key. I am sorry for all the years we lost and all the letters that never reached you and all the birthdays and Christmases and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that we should have spent together and did not. But I am not sorry for what I did, and I hope that by now you understand why. Take care of your brother. Take care of this house. Take care of the land and the people on it, and take care of yourself. You have been taking care of everyone else for so long. It is time someone took care of you. I love you, my boy. I have always loved you, and wherever I am now, I am proud of you. Forever. Grandma. I set the letter down on the table. My hands were steady, my eyes were not. Marcus reached across and picked it up. He read it slowly, his lips moving slightly with each word. When he finished, he set it down and stared at it for a long time. The afternoon light moved slowly across the table, the golden rectangles shifting as the sun settled lower in the sky. I want to stay, he said. His voice was quiet. There was no anger in it, no bitterness, no defense. Just a simple statement from a boy who had spent 10 years believing he had no place in the world and had just been told by a dead woman that she had built one for him. I want to stay, he said again, like he needed to say it twice to believe it. Like the words were so foreign to him that they required repetition before they could become real. Then we stay, I said. We sat at that table as the light changed and the shadows lengthened and the first star appeared through the kitchen window. We did not talk. We did not need to. Something had settled between us in that silence. Something that felt permanent. Something that felt like the beginning of everything our grandmother had spent her last years hoping for. The investigation continued for months. More victims came forward. More evidence emerged. Families who had been too afraid or too beaten down to fight back found their courage when they learned they were not alone, when they learned that an old woman in a white farmhouse had been quietly building a case on their behalf for years. In the end, Dean Mercer was convicted on 17 counts. Fraud, forgery, wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, extortion. The evidence Eleanor had gathered, combined with the documentation of his attempt to defraud us, created a picture that no defense attorney could argue with. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The families he had defrauded received compensation. The local officials who had taken his money were removed from office. New safeguards were put in place. And through it all, our grandmother's name was mentioned again and again. The woman who had spent years quietly gathering evidence. The woman who had refused to let injustice stand. The woman who had built a weapon for her grandsons to wield on behalf of everyone who had been hurt. She had not just saved us. She had saved a dozen families. And she had done it all from a small farmhouse in Nebraska with nothing but patience and love, and the stubborn belief that eventually the truth would find its way to the right hands. The seasons turned. Winter softened into spring. The ice that had clung to the branches of the old oak melted and dripped into the ground, and the first green shoots of grass appeared in the fields like a promise being kept. Marcus and I worked on the house every day from sunrise until our bodies gave out. We replaced the rotting boards on the porch one by one, measuring twice and cutting once the way Earl taught us. We tore the warped plywood from the windows and installed new glass letting light flood into rooms that had been dark for years. We painted the walls. We refinished the floors. Those first weeks were hard in ways I had not expected. Not just the physical labor, though, that was brutal enough. My hands blistered and bled and slowly hardened into something tougher. My back ached every morning when I stood up, and my shoulders burned every night when I lay down. But the harder thing was learning how to live in a house, how to cook a meal, how to keep a fire going in the stone hearth, how to wake up in this morning and know that nobody was going to tell you what to do or where to go or who to be. That freedom was terrifying at first. It was also the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. The neighbors helped. Earl came by with lumber and tools and advice. Dottie brought food. Walter gave me a part-time job at the general store, which became full-time when his arthritis got bad enough that he could not manage alone. Peggy from the post office became our information network, telling us who needed help and who had something to offer, and generally making sure we were woven into the fabric of the community, whether we wanted to be or not. Marcus enrolled at Alder Creek High School to finish his senior year. He had been terrified on the first day, certain that he would be the outsider, the angry foster kid who did not belong. But the teachers remembered Eleanor. They remembered her cookies at Christmas and her donations to the school library. They welcomed Marcus not as a stranger, but as the grandson of someone they had loved. He made friends, real friends, not the temporary alliances of the foster system that could be broken at any moment by a transfer or a placement change. He joined the baseball team. He was terrible, could not hit a curveball to save his life, and his throwing arm was a liability that the coach politely declined to discuss. But nobody cared. They cheered for him anyway. They slapped him on the back when he struck out and told him he would get it next time. He went to his first prom with a girl named Sarah who worked at the feed store. She had freckles and a laugh that could fill a room, and she looked at Marcus like he was someone worth looking at. He came home that night with a smile on his face that I had never seen before in 17 years of knowing him. The smile of someone who had just discovered that the world contained things other than pain. When he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, the entire town stood. Not polite applause, real cheers, shouts and whistles, and the kind of noise that a community makes when it is claiming one of its own. I was in the audience with tears on my face thinking about what Eleanor would have felt to see this moment. The grandson she had sacrificed everything for, standing tall in a cap and gown, finally free. He was accepted to the community college in the next county. Agricultural business. He wanted to learn the science behind the land that was now ours. He talked about the future sometimes, about expanding the farm, adding livestock, planting cover crops, turning 47 acres of neglected farmland into something worth passing down. For the first time in his life, my brother had a plan that extended beyond surviving to the next week. And watching him talk about it, watching his hands move, as he described where the new fence line would go, I saw something in him that I had never seen before. Purpose. I took over the general store when Walter finally retired. 43 years he had run that place. He stayed on as what he called a consultant, which meant he came by every few days to sit in the chair by the wood stove and tell me I was stacking the canned goods wrong. He told stories about Eleanor, about the day she walked in for the first time and asked for a brand of flour he had never heard of, and how he drove 40 miles to Lincoln the next day to find it because something about her made him want to be the kind of storekeeper who had what people needed. That was Eleanor, he said. She made you want to be better, not by telling you to be better, just by being who she was. 8 months after we arrived, I sat on the porch of our freshly painted farmhouse and watched the sun set over the cornfields. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple that I never knew existed when I lived in the city. The air smelled like earth and growing things and the promise of harvest. Somewhere in the distance, a tractor hummed as a neighbor worked late. Marcus sat beside me with a cup of coffee in his hands. We had fallen into this routine without meaning to. Ending each day on this porch, watching the light change, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. The house behind us was transformed. White paint gleaming, windows sparkling, porch straight and strong. But it was more than the physical repairs. The rooms were warm now. The smell of cooking food and fresh coffee drifted through open windows. The walls still held the old photographs of our childhood, but now there were new ones too. Marcus at graduation, me behind the counter at the store, Earl and Dottie at the 4th of July picnic, Sarah and Marcus on the porch steps with their shoulders touching and their faces turned toward the sun. Eleanor's letters were in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, all 512 of them. I read one every night before sleep, a different letter each time. Her garden, the Nebraska winters, the neighbors, and through everything, her love for us. I had read enough of them now to know her voice as well as I knew my own. The rhythm of her sentences, the way she circled back to the same hopes, the way she ended every letter the same way. I love you, my boys, forever. On the second anniversary of our arrival, I walked out to the old oak tree. The sun was setting, the sky was doing that thing it does in Nebraska where every color bleeds into the next until the whole horizon looks like it was painted by someone who had never learned the meaning of restraint. The fields were golden with late summer wheat. The air was warm and still. The oak stood where it had always stood, ancient and patient. Its branches spread wide against the fading light. I sat down at its base with my back against the rough bark, and I talked to her. I told her about the farm, about the crops Marcus had planted, and the 3 cows Earl had helped us buy. I told her about the store and the customers who came in every day. I told her about Marcus and Sarah and his plans for the future. I told her about the night Marcus finally told me what happened in that second foster placement, about the man with the belt, about the 6 months of silence and bruises and fear, about how he cried and then stood up and wiped his face and said he was ready to let it go. Not forget, never forget, but set it down and walk forward without it. And I told her about the envelope, about her letter, about the words that had changed everything. You need a place to belong. You need walls that know your name. She had been right. We had needed exactly that. And she had given it to us from beyond the grave through a rusted iron key and a sealed envelope and 500 letters that never reached us in time but reached us exactly when they were supposed to. I understand now, I said out loud. I understand why you did what you did, and I forgive you. Not because you need forgiveness, but because I needed to say it. You did everything right. You loved us perfectly, even when it meant letting us go. The wind moved through the leaves of the old oak, and for just a moment, it sounded like a sigh, like someone who had been waiting a very long time to hear those words. I stood up and brushed the grass from my jeans. The house was lit up in the distance, warm yellow light spilling from every window. Marcus was inside cooking dinner, Dottie's pot roast recipe. He was getting better at it. Not as good as Dottie, maybe never as good as Eleanor, but better than last month and improving. At the edge of the field, I turned and looked back at the oak. Its massive shape was dark against the star-filled skyline, a sentinel, a guardian, a witness to everything that had happened on this land for 100 years. I will take care of it, I said. All of it, I promise. Then I turned and walked home. It has been 4 years now since that Tuesday morning at Greenfield Children's Home. 4 years since Harold Prescott walked into Mrs. Langley's office with a rusted iron key and a story that changed everything. I am 22 years old. Marcus is 21. We are not children anymore. We are not wards of the state. We are not numbers in a database or files in a cabinet or problems to be solved by people who do not know our names. We are men, standing on our own land, building our own lives. The house is beautiful now. The garden overflows with vegetables. The fields are golden with wheat and green with corn. Every Sunday, we gather around the table that Eleanor ate at for decades. Marcus and Sarah, Earl and Dottie, Walter with his walker and his endless stories, Peggy with her casseroles, and whoever else happens to be around because there is always room. There is always enough. We say grace before we eat, not because we are particularly religious, but because it seems right to acknowledge the hands that made this possible, the hands that planted and harvested and cooked and served, the hands that wrote 500 letters to children who could not write back, the hands that pinned a note to a small boy's jacket and walked away with a breaking heart because walking away was the only way to keep him safe. Sometimes late at night, I still talk to Eleanor. I sit on the porch or walk out to the oak tree and I tell her about my day. I do not know if she hears me. I do not know how any of this works, but I talk to her anyway. Because she spent 10 years talking to me even when I could not hear her, even when I did not know she existed, even when I believed the worst about her. She never stopped. And neither will I. My grandmother taught me that home is not just a place you are given. It is a place you build. It is a place you fight for. It is a place you earn with your own two hands and your own stubborn heart. She taught me that love does not disappear just because you cannot see it. That sometimes the people who love us most are the ones we never knew were there. She taught me that the past does not have to define the future, that endings can become beginnings, that even the most broken stories can find their way to hope. I am Ethan Cole, and I am finally home. I have one final question for you, the most important question I can ask. What is the most precious thing you have ever inherited? It does not have to be money or property or anything you can hold in your hands. It could be a lesson someone taught you, a memory that shaped who you became, a piece of advice that changed your direction, or simply the knowledge that someone somewhere loved you more than you ever knew. Because I believe that our stories are the most valuable things we have. They connect us across distances. They heal wounds we did not know we had. They remind us that we are not alone, that we have never been alone, that somewhere out there someone is thinking of us, hoping for us, loving us, even when we cannot feel it. Be brave. Know that you are loved, and know that no matter where you are, no matter how lost you feel, you have the power to find your way home. The key is already in your hand. You just have to turn it. Until next time.